That's how I managed to generate £24,192 in totally passive income so far this calendar year. Hello and welcome back to another episode of My Journey to FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence and Retire Early. One of my long-term goals in life is to earn enough passive income to fund a good lifestyle without the need for a 9-to-5 job. So in this video series, I give an update every month on how I'm investing my money to generate streams of passive income, such as stocks and shares, savings interests, rental income and more. And because it's spooky season, I've decided that this episode should be a little bit scarier than usual. And because this is an investing YouTube channel, what could be scarier than a crash in the market? It took me 2.5 hours to make that, and it's still shit. But interestingly, as I was buying that pumpkin, it got me thinking about how people's buying behaviours change around festive periods like Halloween. I mean, is there actually any cultural significance to Halloween? Or is it just a big marketing ploy by big chocolate, big costumes and big pumpkin to earn more money? And call me a conspiracy theorist here, but I believe that celebrations like Mother's Day and Father's Day were invented by companies like Hallmark just so they could sell more flowers and more cards. So there you go, there's a business idea for you. Create a traditional holiday like a Halloween or a Valentine's and then sell an associated product. And what's great about this idea is that the product doesn't have to have anything at all to do with the holiday. Take Easter for example. Jesus Christ crawls out of a cave after being dead for 3 days, and we say to ourselves, what is the best way that we can symbolise this historic moment? I know, I'll go pop on my bunny costume and start hiding chocolate eggs around the garden. And if you think it's a stupid idea, go and take a look at Betty Crocker, who's absolutely laughing her tits off at all the money that she's made by inventing Pancake Day. For people that are new to this channel, please forgive me, I do have a tendency to go off on tangents. So first up, let's take a look at the dividends I received in my stocks and shares ISA portfolio this month. To start off with, the insurance company Aviva paid me £72.70 in dividends. I also received a dividend of £105 from Phoenix Group, which is a retirement and long-term savings business. This brings my total dividends for October to £177.70 and my total dividends for this calendar year to around £2,900. I also find it quite useful to track my passive income progress by comparing my dividends to previous years. As you can see from the graph, my dividends have increased by an average of 31% per year when looking at dividends from January to October. That's it for dividends this month, so let's move on to my stocks and shares portfolio. As I mentioned in the last episode, I've decided to start saving up to buy a house. This means that I want to start mitigating my risks when it comes to investments, so my previous plan of investing the full £20,000 allowance in my stocks and shares ISA has been put on hold. So instead, I decided to invest the rest of my ISA allowance, which was £8,000, into a cash ISA instead. And as there won't be any more money going into my stocks and shares ISA this financial year, it doesn't mean that there won't be any more activity. I'll still have my dividends to reinvest, and as was the case this month, I'll still be shuffling things around. And first up, I sold my Lloyds Bank shares for around £2,500. Lloyds Bank was one of the first stocks I ever bought back in 2015, and whilst they paid a decent dividend of somewhere between 3 to 6% over the years, the value of the stocks only went up by about 2% in that entire period, and most of the time was spent in the red. So for me, Lloyds was just not cutting the mustard anymore, and I decided it was time to say goodbye. I also sold my National Grid shares for about £4,700, which is pretty much what I paid for them. And again, it was a similar sort of story to Lloyds, where the dividend was okay, but the share price was just a little bit too static for my liking. And another reason for selling both Lloyds and National Grid was that I wanted to save up a bit of cash to make a totally brand new investment, something I'd never bought before. I bought £5,000 worth of a physical gold ETF, which ironically is all virtual. I was kind of hoping to get a few solid gold bars in the post, but apparently that's not how they do it anymore. And there were several reasons for buying gold. Firstly, gold is considered a hedge against inflation, meaning that the gold price goes up when inflation is high. So what this means is that unlike your actual currency, like your pounds, euros, pesos, reals, rupees, rand, Albanian leks,
2 hours later,
or Belarusian rubles, gold tends not to lose its purchasing power. Gold also tends to hold its value during both economic and geopolitical uncertain times. In fact, it's actually during times of uncertainty that people tend to buy gold. And these could be things like the election of a new president, or rising conflicts between countries that are at war, or the fact that Elon Musk's humanoid robots are definitely going to destroy all of human civilization. I mean, how many movies have to be made to show that building an AI-driven humanoid robot is a fucking bad idea? You've got the Terminator, iRobot, The Matrix, WALL-E. I don't trust that little bastard. And another thing, I don't remember getting a memo saying that sci-fi movies have become real life and that we're now expected to see these Black Mirror style robots walking around our house. God knows, if I ever see one of those robots walking around my house, I'm throwing it in the bath and chucking in a toaster for good measure. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, gold. Gold is always in high demand, whether that's amongst investors or emerging countries like China and India, where gold has a lot of cultural value. And I mean, gold has been traded since like 600 BC, so it's highly unlikely that it's suddenly going to lose all of its value overnight. And whilst this is a little bit different from your more traditional investments like your stocks and bonds and ETFs, it is considered a very sound investment and one of the safest investments on the market.
I love gold!
I also decided to sell my Phoenix Group shares for about £2,000. I ended up selling this for a loss of about £200, but I wasn't particularly bothered about that because over the years, Phoenix Group has paid me hundreds of pounds in dividends. The timing actually ended up working quite well too because the ex-dividend date was the 3rd of October and I decided to sell on the 14th. Had I sold before the 3rd of October, I wouldn't have just received the £105 that I did. So there's another life lesson for you. Always check the ex-dividend dates before selling a share. And the reason that I owned Phoenix Group in the first place was because they paid a cracking dividend of somewhere between 8 to 10%. The reason I sold it, however, was because I came across an ETF called the Global X Super Dividend ETF, which, you guessed it, pays a super great fucking dividend. They invest in about 100 of the top dividend producing companies on the market, providing those companies have good fundamental financials. Not only that, but they pay their dividends monthly, so you're guaranteed to get a nice little top up every month. This investment is considered a little bit more high risk, but based on the risk weighting of my existing portfolio and the fact that I'm still relatively young, I decided it was a risk worth taking and I've decided to invest £5,000. So currently my stocks and shares portfolio consists of the following companies and funds. You can also see in this pie chart the relative weightings of each holding in my portfolio based on their value. In this line graph, the blue line represents the average monthly value of my stocks and shares ISA, and at the end of October, the portfolio was valued at around £107,000. The red line and the numbers in the table show how much the value of the portfolio has actually changed after you exclude the money that I've invested into the account. So from January to October, the value of my portfolio has increased by around £9,700, or 12.5%. In terms of property, I own a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom flat in the East Midlands of the UK. I lived there myself for about 3 years, and then when I moved to London for work, I just decided to keep it and rent it out. I rent it out for £1,275 a month, but after property management costs, this comes to £1,144 a month. This month, however, there were a few additional expenses, meaning that I only took home £839. And this is one thing to remember about renting out property, is that the income can be quite unpredictable. So this brings my total rental income for this calendar year so far to around £9,700. This money is after expenses but before tax, so unlike the money in my stocks and shares ISA, I will have to pay tax on this passive income. Rental income is classed as general income tax, so you're taxed on it the same way you're taxed on your money from work, using the same tax brackets. So for example, if my income from work was £40,000 a year and I received £10,000 in rental income that year as well, I would be classed as having an income of £50,000. Last up, we have interest. For my savings accounts, I like to use Zopa. They're an online-only bank and offer pretty competitive rates on all of their products. I have 3 separate savings accounts in Zopa, one of which is an instant access savings account, which pays 4.3%, one of which is a 7-day notice period account, paying 4.33%, and another one is a cash ISA, which pays 4.8%. The 7-day notice period account is purely for security reasons. So if my account ever got hacked, it means that the hacker wouldn't be able to access that money for 7 days, which is plenty of time for me to contact the bank and tell them not to release the money. At the start of the month, I had about 22.5 grand in savings across all 3 of those accounts, which meant that I was given £79 in interest. In addition to those savings accounts, I also had a couple of fixed term 12-month savings accounts expire this year. The first one expired in January and paid out about £640 in interest, and the second one expired in July, paying about £600 in interest. This brings my total interest across all of those savings accounts to over £1,700 this year. Unfortunately, all of this interest, other than the interest generated in the cash ISA, will be liable to tax. There is, however, a personal savings allowance based on your income tax band, so some of this income will be exempt from tax. So to summarise, so far this year I've received £2,920.26 in dividends, £9,747.89 in rental income, and £1,786.71 in money from interest in savings accounts. This comes to a grand total of £14,454.86 in passive income since January. But let's not forget the £9,738 in capital gains from my stocks and shares ISA. When that's accounted for, that's how I managed to generate £24,192 in totally passive income so far this calendar year. So that's going to be it for this episode. If you found this video interesting, insightful or useful, or want to join me on my journey to FIRE, then click subscribe, and why not give it a like as well for good measure. I'm also in the process of making a video about what the announcements in the autumn budget mean for your personal finances. So there's another good reason to sub. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.